How's it going? I want to do a video version of this. I just released a podcast on it. Unfortunately, the video file got corrupted, so got to redo it, but that's okay. Got the info right here. Talking about the coronavirus some more. This is a Christian apologetics vlog and podcast that I do. So what I want to do is apply Christian apologetics thinking to something like the coronavirus. Is God in control? To what extent is he in control? How do we know? Why would he allow something like this to happen? And what's the outlook on things like this? So I'm going to dive right in. Last week, talked about what some churches are doing to kind of mitigate the ill effects of the virus and the social distancing and the economy and all those things. Want to bring up a couple of pastors' perspectives on this, and then we're going to dive into this, something from Reasons to Believe. So this will help form a healthy view on the coronavirus, the problem of evil, and how those things link. So there's basically four ways to evaluate the nature of this virus, where it came from, why it's here. God did it, Satan did it, nature did it, or people did it. And it's hard to pin one perspective, really. Even taking a biblical approach, it's hard to pin just one of these as true. And maybe they all have something to contribute to the conversation. Okay, God did it. 100% God did it. No other underlying factors. It is God's sovereignty. God's sovereignty has the final say of everything that happens on this planet. So everything that happens is by nature good. So the coronavirus isn't a bad thing. It's not an evil. If I were to go jump off my balcony, that wouldn't be a bad thing either. It's all the best means for a greater good. Or another perspective on God doing it, maybe this is intentional so that the benefit, the immunity that's derived from overcoming this virus leads to greater benefits to more human bodies. Okay, maybe. Maybe this is God did it in a negative sense, like God's judging the world, judging the greed, the pride, sexual sin, by inflicting hardship in the world. Okay, could be. Or maybe this is just God's means of drawing eyes and hearts back to him. Maybe he's so interested in people, he's willing to inflict disciplinary pain on them in order to arouse their attention and draw the attention back to him. Okay, maybe. Over time, maybe we'll see if that takes place. But I don't know that this perspective really encompasses everything that's going on with it. Okay, the devil did it. There are some church leaders that teach pretty blatantly that this is the devil's doing. Joseph Prince, less than 2 years ago, in 2018, he prophesied, or I might call it a word of knowledge, a word of wisdom. He said that a new strain of virus is going to be created by the devil. It's going to be very painful to people. But, he said, God gives us authority to trample the enemy. God gives us authority to trample the enemy. What do you make of that? What do you do with that? Does that mean you can walk into a place that's inundated with the coronavirus and not get it? Does that mean you can walk out in the rain and not get wet? No. But there is some kind of measure of us overcoming the enemy, right? It's got to be. But does God keep the faithful from getting it? I don't think so. Look at the Seattle choir. 60 people in a choir meeting around March 10th, 11th. 60 people. Of the 60, 45 either had the coronavirus or exhibited the exact signs of the coronavirus. They're being faithful, and yet they get it. And it wasn't the Louisiana church, but a Arkansas church where an outbreak occurred there. The church kept its doors open maybe longer than it should have. They're trying to be faithful to God and please him, and yet the coronavirus activates inside that church. You have nature working. Maybe it's not nature. Maybe it's the devil. If it's the devil, he's really inflicting people with it from diverse backgrounds. Seems to be no rhyme or reason to who gets it and who doesn't. At Victory Family Church, one of the teachers there pointed to Luke 13 to show that it is Satan that causes sicknesses. Luke 13, 11 to 17, Jesus said that Satan bound this woman who was, I believe, 18 years inflicted. Satan was the source of it. It's not God punishing her with it. But this leads to a bigger question. Okay, if Satan can just inflict people with a virus, why doesn't he do that more? Why doesn't everybody have it? Or why doesn't everybody have that and worse viruses if Satan can just inflict people with these hardships? Well, then you've got God's power again withholding things, right? How does this balance work? Or is it not so much a balance between God's power and Satan's power, but both of them in our world and we kind of dictate which takes place? Is that what it is? So Satan seems to have a certain sphere of things he can do, because not everybody has the virus, not even close. And it seems like he would want to steal, kill, and destroy even more than what is going on now. But what's holding that back? Okay, maybe nature did it. Maybe it's just purely nature. And I think when we review this, we'll see the perspective that maybe it's nature. In this perspective, nature is generally good, but things corrupt over time. This is a world that's subject to decay. Within nature, we're caught in a generally good thing, and we are kind of the instruments to try to overcome what nature throws our way, the difficulties that it brings us. Maybe it's just nature, and this is the way things are, and we do our best to overcome it. Okay, could be. And there's another perspective. People did it. Maybe the virus is contrived in a lab. Maybe it's a means of terrorism, population management. Maybe somebody wants to destroy the world economy and rise to power. Okay, maybe. Those things are always intriguing, but it seems to be a poor way to go about it. Maybe there's other conspiracy theories. Somebody said these jet streams flying over are dropping chemicals, and maybe they're dropping the coronavirus because they're trying to control people. One of the pastors, the Louisiana pastor, he thought that this was all about political control. Or maybe it's a different perspective. Maybe it's not terrible intentions from humans. Maybe there's bad interactions that have taken place with animals. A lot of viruses inside animals, a lot of the diseases that we get originate in animals, and maybe if we just dealt wisely with these wild animals, we would never get these viruses. Okay, maybe. So 4 perspectives. God did it, the devil did it, nature did it, or people did it. They all seem to contribute something, and I think they all have something to say in this. But to the big intriguing question, why would a good God create viruses? I happened to receive this DVD in the mail a year or two ago back in Tennessee. Why would a good God create viruses? Okay, never seemed like that interesting of a question until the last month or so. And now, it's fascinating to just understand what a virus is and how it actually fits into God's good creation. So this is by Anjanette Roberts, also called A.J. Roberts. She takes the approach that viruses, like the rest of nature, are part of God's good creation. It actually took her some time before she could realize this because, like most of us, she thought viruses bad. Bacteria, bad. Germs, bad. Viruses, bad. Too narrow of an approach. But in her pursuit, she asked 2 big questions. Where did viruses come from, and how do they fit into the Christian narrative? The fall, the redemption, and the creation. How does it all work together? And it's no wonder. You can't blame Roberts and most of the people for thinking that viruses are by and large a horrible part of creation. Even evidence of dysteleology, that's evidence against God's design. Teleology is the design argument for God. Dysteleology is the bad design or lack of design argument against the existence of God. But we discovered viruses not by trying to find a good thing, but to try to understand where certain sicknesses came from. So viruses have given the world the flu, AIDS, measles, the common cold, hepatitis, and more. And in fact, we discovered them at least 100 years ago because of the diseases that began to surface. The Spanish flu that killed at least 25 million and as many as 50 million was a virus. And the year before Robert's video came out, Ebola killed about 11,000. Viruses existed long before these outbreaks. They were just undetected because they never caused any problems. It's kind of like electricity. You forget that it's there, working, continually doing its job until something goes horribly wrong. Or it's like pastors in the news. You never hear about the quality of their normal work for thousands of them over thousands of days, but the news is sure to go crazy when a rotten apple does something rotten. That person kept his church open, or he cussed at church, or crashed his motorcycle in the sanctuary, or was caught in a child porn sting. Oh, you'll hear about those, but not about the normal good pastor. But that's all a bunny trail. The point is, a correct perspective of viruses, like these other things, reveals more than their very occasional pain to the human body. What are viruses? Are they little demons working inside the bodies? Well, no, they're simply proteins or nucleic acids with occasional lipid envelopes. This means that viruses are strands, or a large series of strands of genetic information. Okay, genetic information is the letters of DNA. You have a nucleic acid that is one strand. Proteins, it's kind of like a three-dimensional object that's made because the nucleic acids themselves are like a blueprint. Proteins are formed from the nucleic acids. So another level more complex. So when this genetic information attaches to an already living thing, it throws new words, so to speak, into the instructions of that living thing. It's like a new command on the living thing's functions and behavior. So the living thing is now slightly altered. Now, almost all of the effects that viruses have on living things are in relation to bacteria. And there is a ton of bacteria on our planet, actually a lot more than a ton. Roberts said, Google had a few different answers here, but Roberts said that there are 100 times more bacterial cells in the human body than human cells. In spite of all this bacteria, our bodies still function incredibly well. I mean, large teams of scientists can't even create anything remotely resembling it. And these bacteria are essential to the normal functioning of the human body. Bacteria is essential to life on Earth, and viruses are essential to bacteria. Therefore, viruses are essential to life on Earth. There are lots of viruses. Robert said that there are 10 to the 31st power viruses, one with 31 zeros after it. Probably give or take several hundred billion. My understanding is that they haven't determined them to be anywhere besides Earth. And yet viruses outnumber the stars in the sky and grains of sand on all the seashores by 10 million times. They are so common that if you were to take a gram, a cubic centimeter, a milliliter of water, there would be between 1 million and 10 million virus particles in that cubic centimeter. I'll toast to that. Good thing they are tiny, because I can't taste them at all. How tiny, you ask? Oh, there's a good question. One virus is 1/1000th the width of a human hair. So 1,000 viruses stacked end to end would span a human hair. How far do you think all the viruses in the world would stack? You think they'd go a mile? More. To the other side of the United States? More. To the moon? More. To the sun? More. To the nearest star? More. To the nearest galaxy? More. To the Andromeda galaxy and back? More. It would reach Andromeda and back 20 times. That's with one being 1/1000th the width of a human hair. That's a lot of viruses. Every time you take a breath, or a sip of water, or probably a bite of food, you are ingesting viruses. And you know what? Most of these are doing their job to keep life functioning on Earth. But of course, viruses aren't living things and they don't reproduce by themselves. Bacteria, though, they reproduce very fast, and this is why viruses can reproduce. When you have bacteria reproducing and you have a virus that's putting its words, it's kind of like inserting a sentence into a printing press. Now that it reprints again and again, that sentence is going to be reprinted. So why don't bacteria, if they reproduce so fast, why don't they completely take over our body or completely take over the world? Why isn't the world just a big ball of bacteria and nothing else? It's because of viruses. There's a dynamic, symbiotic relationship between viruses and bacteria. Robert says that they depend on each other, and this creates quite the conundrum for naturalistic evolution. Kind of an aside, but bacteria are what they are because of viruses, but viruses can't multiply without entering living cells like bacteria. Bit of a chicken and egg problem. A lot of problems like that. Symbiotic relationships that make naturalistic evolution an overwhelming difficulty. But with this balance between bacteria and viruses, there is this harmony that leaves us with an optimal or now near optimal level of balance between the two. Bacteria has not completely taken over, but there's still enough to carry out plant functions, animal functions, and human functions, which are essential to the continuation of healthy lives on this planet. In other words, if we were to get rid of viruses or bacteria, either one or the other, we would be doomed. Without viruses, bacteria would consume everything without restraint. What if we go slightly in the other direction and lose a percentage of bacteria? We'd have a hard time even digesting the food that keeps our engines going. What does this mean? You and I, in a broad sense, should be very thankful for the existence of viruses and the existence of bacteria. And here's another reason that Roberts is thankful for viruses. I don't know how much I'm in line with this point from a philosophical standpoint, but she says that viruses have a part in redemption. By this, she means that viruses help us overcome illnesses in the human body. Well, viruses are the cause of the illness. Viruses are also the cure to the illness. It seems like if you just don't have illnesses in the first place, you don't need the viruses to overcome the illnesses. That's kind of my philosophical perspective on it. But she sees that scientists and science in general is the means of God's intervention into the world. See, God used to work through miracles, just divine miracles, sometimes without human instruments. But now, He's using the human mind and human ingenuity to overcome some of the illnesses. We're instruments of God's redemption. So research about viruses has led to much of what we know about molecular and cell biology. In other words, without it, we would not have come to such great advances in medicine in particular and science in general. Viruses fight cancers and viral diseases. They fought the polio vaccine completely to eradication. They fought smallpox and eradicated that. So the vast majority of viruses are very good, right? Well, that still leaves us with the issue of why are there any bad ones? That's great. We've got an overwhelming perspective of good viruses. People are still going to be focusing on why are there any bad ones? Well, okay, let's take a step back on this problem of evil thing and consider where our expectations lie. It's because it's pretty drastic. And to illustrate, it's springtime now in Albuquerque, so the trees have bloomed and it's very colorful outside. So I'm walking by this tree and, the spring is kind of fresh. So I'm kind of stunned by it. And I think, look at all the flowers that are blooming off this tree. Maybe there were 10,000 flowers. Would it be reasonable for me to find the one spot where the flower didn't bloom? Maybe somebody rubbed it off, or maybe it just was premature or something like that. But would it be reasonable for me to look at that and say, a poorly designed tree, one of the flowers didn't sprout? No, if I take a few steps back and I look at the tree at large, I can tell this is a beautifully designed thing. There is no sense focusing on the 0.01% that maybe isn't doing its best and neglecting the 99.99%. It is operating according to its beautiful design. Does the world owe to people to bring it to 100%? Does the world owe it to you somehow to meet your expectation of what you think 100% should look like? Well, it shouldn't have to do it with the tree, and I don't think anybody expects it to do it with the tree, but why do we expect it from things like viruses or bacteria? So first, this isn't an accurate or satisfying way to evaluate the world. But second, there might just be a reason for the 0.01%. What might that reason be? Well, Robert suggests a couple possibilities. Human mismanagement has something to do with the decay that takes place on the earth, or with viruses and sicknesses arising. But, and I think she favors this even more, maybe it's just a possible part of decay. Right? In the book of Genesis, after the sin of mankind, God says, "Cursed is the ground because of you." Now, God's not throwing an angry temper tantrum, but he realizes the state of the world has changed so drastically that it's no longer appropriate for humans to dwell here for eternity. People would have to die eventually because sin entered the world. There's actually a grace in that. Because we're not destined to be in a world of decay. We're destined to be in a place of harmony with God, where the good is 100%, and where death no longer reigns. So decay was a part of that. Decay meaning now not everything is going to operate to 100%. And this is the influx of evil into the world. If everything is good to its maximum, and I'd argue only God is good to his maximum, everything below that is going to be lacking in good in some way. And this gap between what good is expressed and the maximal potential of good, that is what is known as evil. Evil is the reduction of good. That's why stealing $1,000 is more evil than stealing $1. The value of the thing dictates the amount of evil that can take place in it. And so the greatest evil that can take place in the world is that which relates to humans, implying that humans are the most good and the most valuable creatures. Now, if a human is here and murder eliminates the human, that's the greatest crime, because you have insulted and reduced the greatest good. Likewise, rape and the dignity of the human. The most drastic crimes insult the good the most. But you cannot create evil out of thin air. You cannot create injustice or hurt out of thin air. You must have something good that's prior to that. So let's relate this to the problem of evil. Just to review the problem of evil, it's got three generally true premises. God is all good, God is all powerful, and evil exists. Now, if God is all good, he would eliminate evil. He would want to. If God is all powerful, he could. He is able to eliminate all evil, yet still at this point evil exists. So the conclusion, the wrongful conclusion by those making this argument, is that no such God can exist because evil exists. How do we know evil exists? We see something like the coronavirus. What's wrong with this argument? As I said, we need to keep in mind that evil is the reduction of good, which means good must already be in place for evil to have a definition. All right, this assumes that there is no way that evil could be part of a greater good. And we don't know whether or not this is the case until the end of the story. After all, there are numerous things that we have thought were bad in the moment, but found out later they're necessary to our development. If we're developed for a satisfying, self-centered life on earth only, then yes. It seems like there would be no resolution to evil, hurts, or injustice in life. But for these terms to even hold meaning, evil, hurt, injustice, perspectives from a theistic world must be adapted. In other words, you got to sit on God's lap to slap him in the face. That's how Frank Turek might say it. Unless we have a value giver who provides the objective perspective of what is good and valuable, anyone can come up with any definition of what may be considered bad, hurtful, or evil. So we have this level of good. We have a reduction in good. This is what's called evil. But decay requires that nothing is really expressing the full nature of what goodness is. We're not made for a satisfying and eternal existence in this life. And why is that? Because this life is where we are veiled from seeing God for who He truly is. The influx of sin into the world has meant that we have an inaccurate perspective of who He is, which means we need to be in a world that is different from this in order to be who we were created to be. Creatures who see Him for who He is and enjoy and glorify His presence forever. In that context, something like the coronavirus really has no bearing on whether we will ultimately fulfill the purpose for which God made us. We just know that we're caught in a world of decay that does not express the maximal goodness. But still, what we see when we look out at our world is this overwhelming beauty, this overwhelming level of God's design. We cannot reasonably say that the design is bad because there is a virus that hurts. Because there are billions of viruses that are leading to the flourishing of human life, plant life, animal life, and the habitation of this planet. This balance we need. This tiny fraction has fallen off into decay in some way, or maybe there was some human manipulation, and now it's hurting. And I do pray that people are not adversely affected by this. But it's with the realization that we're going to be hurt by things in this life. Because this is not the end of our story. God is using this chapter in this life as a means to fulfill a story that's destined to play out differently than what we expect. And it's a story that describes His glory. We're created for a place where we see Him perfectly, and we cannot be here on this earth and do that. So the problem of evil is overwhelmed by the problem of good, the good in creation, and the fact that this story is still continuing. And the fact that evil must first depend on goodness to exist. But what is goodness if there's not some designer who put good intention and value into the things that He created? Therefore, even in the midst of something like the coronavirus, evidence of the good designer is present. The beauty of the creation is exhibited even through viruses, and we should be thankful for them and thankful to our Creator in a broad sense, because He has given us tools to see His handiwork. Like I said, I still pray that people will not be adversely affected by this, but that God will bring good out of all the pain, the isolation, the awkward new normal. But if I can shed any light on a broad perspective of what this is, what viruses are, what good and evil are, and who God is in the midst of it, I've got to say it. And I hope it means something to you. We'll talk to you again soon. God bless and guide you.